pulls you in and doesn't let go.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Carousel Podcast, where we discuss propaganda and media and things like transhumanism with people like Joe Allen. Welcome, Joe.
Very good to be here. Thank you very much.
Yes, we have your book here called Dark Aeon, Transhumanism and the War Against Humanity. And I really enjoy this book. It's actually, it's maybe the only, I can totally see. So you have this kind of thing in here that Steve Bannon came down from on high and sort of found you and plucked you into the stratosphere, as Chris Rufo famously said. And it was like Bannon, being ahead of the curve on everything, somehow knew that this transhumanism discussion was going to become the defining issue of this next phase after Trump. And it's the defining issue, I think, because there's this rift between the ultra pro futurist acceleration people and the MAGA chuds, right? And I think that rift is going to just keep coming up over and over again. And I think Bannon very smartly kind of got ahead of it. Is that sort of how you see it?
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's an argument that I've made pretty much within a year of covering this for Steve. A lot of talk about the World Economic Forum, globalists, transhumanism as the ultimate expression of liberalism, but I definitely didn't see that. And I knew that, for instance, Max Moore, the guy who really brought transhumanism into the household, made it a household name, he's not left-wing or globalist in any meaningful way, very Nietzschean, very much on that kind of Nick Land-ish or Elon Musk-ish wavelength. So it's been difficult. Our audience skews older, to say the least, but not everyone. A lot of younger people approaching me about this. And a misconception that comes up again and again and again, mainly because it was such a useful talking point, is that transhumanism is this lefty globalist thing. It's not. It's trans-political, as it were.
Okay, so what does trans-political mean? What do you mean by that?
I only mean you look at the word transhumanism, trans, across or beyond, so beyond human or across human boundaries, and the movement itself is very much. I mean, you have leftist, Marxist transhumanists. You have a lot of libertarian transhumanists. You have some that flirt with fascism. You have some that are more Christian or theocratic. So it's very complicated. You can't really box it in as simply as saying, Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum, that's where all the transhumanism's coming from. I made the comparison once in a debate with Max Moore and Natasha Vita-Moore that Max and Natasha are sort of like Sid and Nancy, and Klaus Schwab and crew are kind of like Green Day, right? Like Sid and Nancy were slumming it in the ghetto and ended up in a tragic situation, whereas the Green Days of the world just take the biggest stage and suck up all the oxygen. And I think that's the dynamic really you see with the World Economic Forum. I mean, it's very, very important because it shows that the wealthiest people and the most powerful governments on earth are kind of in line with the fourth industrial revolution, which is ultimately like corporate repackaged transhumanism, but it's not the origin, and nor is it exclusive.
Okay, so let's start with the definition of transhumanism because here let me just tee this up. So the other day I was at I was hanging out with a rare hangout with a mainstream liberal type of girl. Which almost never happens to me anymore. But I was doing that anyway for some dumb reason. And, this very typical type of kind of elitist, character from Girls type of girl. And she was saying what I've heard for so long, which is like, why do you care about trans? Why do you care? Like it's just low class to care about trans people. And she's right. She's 100% correct. It's like, it is low class to care about trans people. It is low class to sit around and whine about, men becoming women and blah, blah, blah. And that's why it insidiously has risen and to the point where they're mutilating children, right? Because this why do you care argument is very effective because why do you care, right? And I was trying to articulate why I cared. I mean, beyond the obvious things of like that my daughters are going to face this pressure to like do this stuff. But beyond that, it's transhumanism. The answer to me is transhumanism. And I am an anti-transhumanist. I don't want to do transhumanism. And so I was kind of like, it's transhumanist. It's finding an exterior solution for an interior problem, right? Which we shouldn't do, in my opinion. That's bad. That's evil. On the other hand, I know that people like Zero HP has said to me on the timeline, transhumanism is not transhumanism. That's a different thing. Just because it has trans in it, actually is not transhumanism because you're not transing to anything else. You're just you're not elevating, right? You're just going parallel to some other, something that already exists. So how do we define transhumanism? Is transhumanism or is trans not transhumanism?
Well, there's definitely an overlap. They connect, but I think that kind of like the globalist liberal argument, the argument that transgenderism is just transhumanism light, it doesn't really fit with what I know about either. So transhumanism, as Max Moore defines it, is using science and technology to enhance and expand human capabilities up to the point of going beyond what we are as human beings. It's an old term. One of the first to ever use it was the heretical Jesuit priest Teilhard de Chardin, and then very soon after, his friend Julian Huxley, brother of Aldous Huxley, in a lecture that was delivered, I believe, 1956 and then published 1957. And then it was basically the same idea, although technology wasn't as central to either Desjardins or Huxley. But for them, it was, again, the idea that science and manipulation, mostly cultural, of human beings would allow certain men, or in the long run, all surviving human beings, to go beyond our current state. Huxley compared the future transhuman to the difference between, anyway, the future transhuman and present day humanity in the 50s to the difference between the modern man and, as he put it, Peking man, caveman. So that's the basic idea behind transhumanism. So it's very, very broad, using science and technology to expand capabilities and go beyond what is human, to make ourselves more intelligent, stronger, more beautiful, and ultimately become kind of a supreme being. It's very eugenic in its origins. And now with CRISPR and various other techniques, it goes beyond just selective breeding and into actual modification. On that note, though, about transgenderism, you see there scientists, doctors using technology to go beyond what normally human beings would be, up to the point of completely re-engineering the genitalia, but and the hormonal levels of a human body. But it's not so much of transhumanism is irrelevant to that. I've had transhumanists talk about how transgenderism is basically it's a low grade attempt and a failed attempt at doing that. Some would say that if you were able to put a human being into a pod and actually change their genes from XY to XX, that would be successful kind of transhuman transgenderism. But just doing crude plastic surgeries is not. So, going back to Max Moore, I've had a number of discussions with him. I really need to get back in touch with him soon. But he was very adamant about how all the politics around transgenderism is completely abhorrent to him. I mean, he's very much a libertarian, and so to be forced to speak in some way or another about another human being is against his sense of freedom. And that's also something that's really central to most transhumanists, most prominent transhumanists, is this idea of freedom, morphological freedom. It's not about enslaving the human race and putting chips in their heads, although there are some who go there, but it's more about the freedom to put a chip in your own head without being impeded by the government or mobs of people.
Right. So it sounds like you're basically saying that, yeah, these sort of superficial plastic surgeries is not really what transhumanism means. It's sort of a bastardization of it.
And it's not a popular opinion in a lot of circles, but I think that the way in which people talk about transgenderism, even, I am no fan of the process, and in general, most of the people have been very unpleasant to meet. Not all, but this condemnation of transgenderism because of its unnatural or anti-human implications. You compare that to a Fox News host with all kinds of plastic surgery, right? the blonde bimbo. I mean, it's just gender normative transgenderism.
Somebody was just tweeting that yesterday. I think Ashley Fitzgerald. Do you know Ashley Fitzgerald? She's
no.
Dude, you got to get in with them, bro. This is like I can't believe that this connection hasn't been made yet, but. Yeah, they do doomer optimism, and they're like naturalists, and kind of like they're not really right wing, they're not really left wing, they're kind of like in this middle ground. And yeah, man, like they sorry, hold on, my camera just died. But it's okay. You can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they have this podcast called Doomer Optimism, which is about, sort of like returning to the natural world and, all of this kind of stuff. And she was tweeting the other day, like, I'm tired of this transhumanism. And it was like, women getting this horrible plastic surgery that you see all the time. And so it's like, right, is there really any difference between the two? I mean, I personally think there is, but,
Is she associated with James Pogue?
Yeah, that's
I guess I will be meeting her soon enough at whatever that. I can't remember the name of the retreat. I think it's just Doomer Optimism in June. In Wyoming.
Yeah, I'm going to that too. So
all right, see you there.
See you there. My camera has stopped working, but that's okay. I'm sure it'll come back soon. Oh my God.
The tech gods, if you mock the tech gods, they will definitely respond in kind.
It's funny. That's literally never happened. And now it is.
I assure you.
It is so annoying, man. And it's going to like not work because we already started. That's so fucking annoying, man.
Is it possible to? I guess now that we're live, there's no going back, huh?
Yeah, whatever. Oh man, that's
I've got
really,
I've got
really, really
a
annoying.
highlights reel that I haven't released yet of all the times I've done public speaking, and the PowerPoint or the audio equipment didn't work correctly, and me throwing shit around and cussing. It's a good one. I'm saving it for the longer blooper reel.
Well, isn't it funny how those things never work? They literally never work.
You can test it 100 times, and the
Yeah,
minute you
no.
step up to do it, at least in my experience. Although
Yeah,
I do think that to some extent, maybe some kind of Nick Landian synchronicity is going on there.
yeah. I mean, I go around and I do like presentations in offices like all the time, and never. There's one time ever that it has worked. The first, like the presentation software that they spend months and weeks setting up, it never works. Never. It's like you never show up and just like put in the code and then it comes up on the screen. It is literally 1 out of 100 times does that work the way that it's supposed to work.
Yeah, that's one of millions of reasons that I think that the entire endeavor, whether you call it transhumanism or accelerationism or whatever, long-termism, like all these ideas that
There we
you
go.
can
Oh, I'm
refine,
back.
there you are,
I'm back.
that you can refine technology to the point that you would rely on it not just to, improve your life, or maybe one or two devices to keep you alive like a pacemaker because you had to have it, but that you would give over your entire being to the machine. That's assuming a lot of functionality. That's definitely assuming that sales pitch is really going to come out the other end as a fully fleshed reality. You imagine getting a Neuralink that really does what Elon Musk wants it to do, a full whole brain interface, input and output, read and write, and that thing glitches out. I think that not only is transhumanist philosophy very arrogant, but probably in the long run foolish to the extent it's adopted by some majority, should that ever happen.
Yeah. So tell me more about this book. Like, it's called Dark Aeon. And in reading it, I mean, you go into Kurzweil, which is cool, sort of the birth of the singularity, and we learn that Kurzweil is this kind of crazy guy. I mean, what's really cool is you're digging into a lot of these characters that we see around, and that I think really very few people have kind of put the link, the thread together of how all these people are connected, and at least it's an under discussed topic, as somebody just said. So, what was your sort of approach to this book? I mean, why is it called Dark Aeon? First of all, you sort of explain it, and Aeon's like an angel or it's something. So why is it called Dark Aeon? And then, yeah, how did you approach writing it? I mean, did Bannon be like, "Hey, we need you to write this," or you already were working on it? Like, how is it structured?
The first attempt of the book was completely jettisoned. I scrapped all of it. I was writing a kind of transhumanism 101 book, and a friend of mine, Patrick Wood, apparently was working on the same, and he started sending me copies drafts of his chapters, and I'm like, oh my God, he's written the same thing that I'm working on. So I scrapped the 101 and was glad to do so, actually, and then just started trying to write something with style and some character, a few dick jokes. And so it is, I think of it kind of like, those old concept albums with Pink Floyd, The Wall, or OK Computer, Radiohead, or, Marilyn Manson's Antichrist Superstar, something like that, where you've got this concept album sort of thing. There's an arc, obviously, but each chapter stands alone. So it's separate essays, but it's, the theme continues across. Steve, when the day he hired me, really, he asked if I, had any plans to write a book. I said yes. And from there on, it was basically on me. He did, obviously, mine is basically, it's the second book, but the first actual, one single author book for the War Room imprint at Skyhorse. and he made the connection to Skyhorse for me. And then after that, Steve is very hands off with me. Probably he regrets that a lot of times, but he basically is just like, don't say anything stupid, don't give anything a gay title. That's the main rules that I have. I do say stupid things a lot, but I like all my titles. And Dark Aeon is a reference to, the opening. You can read the poem by David Jones from the 40s, The Narrows. And in the poem, he talks about the cosmocrats of the Dark Aeon. And, for him, he's a Brit. World War II is raging. And he's, in a sense, talking about the threat of war and the threat of invasion. But you can tell that he's also referencing Gnostic ideas, this idea of cosmocrats, the universal rulers of the Dark Aeon. And the word aeon seems to be a reference to Gnosticism. I would say I'm very confident that's what he intended. And so I've been in and around Gnosticism since I was in my early 20s, and have been much more, say, closely tied to a number of people who are in various Gnostic movements. So it seemed like a good theme, and it's more of a theme. There's one chapter, Virtual Gnosis, that I really go into depth on it. But it's important because, for instance, the robot Sophia, the one that you see everywhere, she's presented at the UN, made a citizen in Saudi Arabia, all these different publicity stunts created by Ben Goertzel and David Hansen. Sophia is a reference to Gnosticism, the goddess or Aeon Sophia. And the kind of idea that Ben Goertzel and David Hansen they're working with underlying the singularity is kind of a reverse Gnosticism. We don't have to go into all that, or we can, but I'll skip over it for now, just to say that Dark Aeon.
Let's talk about Gnosticism for a second.
Just to say, Dark Aeon is both a reference to Sophia and the myth of the fall as the Gnostics saw it, and also, the traditional meaning of eon, a period of time. It's a dark period of time. I do think that things are getting so stupid that we're entering a kind of information-saturated dark age, where it's not lack of literacy, but perhaps so much information, especially bad information, that we can look forward to a period of a decades, in which most people kind of inhabit their own mostly false or half-true realities.
Yeah, it's funny that you say this thing about right. It's we're entering the new world where everything is upside down. This is kind of the age of Aquarius, right? Because the age of Aquarius is rebirth, and like an Aquarius person is like a baby, right? And an Aquarius age is like everything's new. And so if you start looking at it through this lens, you see this everywhere. It's like instead of scarcity, we have overabundance, right? Like instead of war, we have too much peace, and that's really true of information, right? It's like formerly information was power. Now information is weakness because there's too much of it. And you see that in like we have clients in the cybersecurity world. And what's so great about my job is I get to like dig deep into these various businesses. And what you realize in cybersecurity is that the entire problem with cybersecurity in today's world is too much information. That's how like the threats hide, because there's just a million notifications and things like flying around all over the place that you can't tell which things are innocent and which they aren't. And I think that you're really right. It's like we're entering a sort of informational dark age, not because there isn't enough, but because there's just way too much.
Yeah, 1,000%. It's funny sometimes, but I always thought all of this was actually really funny for most of my adult life. All the conspiracy theories. Kurzweil himself was always kind of a clownish figure in my mind. I read the age of spiritual machines, like 2001, and just it was horrifying. If you thought, well, if this actually did come about, then what a nightmare. But it seemed really ridiculous at the time. Like Napster was a big thing, right? People were just getting Gmail instead of AOL.com or whatever. So it just all seemed so absurd, and it still does, but less absurd. It's kind of like those old cargo cults, in the Oceania, and you had, the tribesmen, the Euros would visit, and they'd land a plane, and they would have cargo in the plane, and they did whatever with the tribe, and then they would leave, and sometimes they wouldn't come back or come back for a long time, and in their absence, the more industrious tribesmen, the high priest, would begin like taking boxes and creating like fake radios, and they create a fake runway, and they would do what they thought an air traffic controller should do, and like have little sticks for antennas, and basically do spells trying to conjure the plane back with all the cargo, and they form these cargo cults.
Right, cargo cults, yeah.
And I oftentimes thought of transhumanism like that. It's just a cargo cult. You're talking about superhuman artificial intelligence, full brain interfaces, humanoid robots everywhere. Human beings, those biological human beings that are still around, are so genetically modified and mutated. They aren't really the same species anymore. All this sort of stuff. Like, you guys are just dreaming. You're literally a cargo cult. You're pretending like you're transhuman, but this is just an absurd parody of it. But as these technologies,
who is that? Who is cargo culting?
Even Elon Musk. He's at the forefront. He owns some of the, for instance, Tesla AI is arguably the most sophisticated AI on the planet. And Neuralink is also arguably the most sophisticated brain-computer interface. They've blown past the competitors at BlackRock Neurotech and Synchron. So, but even then, Musk talks about the future, even the near future, in these. It sounds like a religious prophecy. It sounds like people in the 90s speaking of the Antichrist coming and giving everybody a barcode for on their forehead, which never happened. And I suspect that Musk is in all going. Ray Kurzweil, Ben Goertzel, Hugo de Garis, even some of the more sane figures, Max Tegmark, people like this, Nick Bostrom, who is maybe not sane but extremely smart. All of them are.
Bostrom's the it's gonna kill us, right? Or is he super?
Yeah,
he's paper clips.
Yeah, that's Bostrom is paper clips. He took it from Less Wrong, but now he's talking about deep utopia. So, whatever. I guess the future can change very, very quickly depending on maybe your book contract or new data, whatever it is.
Wait. Hold on. So you're saying.
It is kind of like a cargo cult, but let's just say that some of the cargo is starting to arrive.
Okay, but who then is the real deal in this model? I think you're saying something actually very profound right now that I've never heard anybody say, and it's really, really fascinating. But who's the Aeon? Where's the angels? Who are the angels that are the real deal?
It's a mythos.
What is that? What is that? What
it's
does that mean?
So I'm not a Gnostic.
Okay, what is a Gnostic? We got to start with what is a Gnostic? What is a Gnostic?
To begin with, it's not me. I'm entirely too agnostic to be a Gnostic. But
okay, what is a Gnostic? Say what a Gnostic is.
Gnosticism in its original form actually predates Christianity, but as it really has imprinted itself on the cultural imagination, Gnosticism was a Christian group in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd centuries that instead of looking at the canonic books, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the letters of Paul, things like this, they had a lot of other traditions that were part of it. And a really kind of simple way of thinking about it is that what became the Orthodox Church focused mostly on faith, on pistis. You had to have faith in Jesus Christ, in your belief, your proper belief, your orthodoxy, right? Your straight belief was the key to salvation. The Gnostics, again, drawing on older traditions, much older traditions, believed that it wasn't faith in this man-made institution, or as presented by one. it was gnosis. It was direct knowledge, direct experience. Gnosis is Greek for knowledge, and in this case, it means a special knowledge or a direct experience of something non-physical, a spiritual realm full of entities and principles that go beyond the material. So it's
Yeah.
real.
So
stark
they're
separation.
saying that the Bible is not true. Maybe okay, fine. Maybe it's true, but the Bible is actually a portal to something bigger than even the Bible. That's kind
Yeah,
of right. Yeah, like but
a lot of them
that we
reject
can't
it.
really understand. That we can't really understand what that is.
Well, so the Bible itself, the Bible as we have it now, the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, it's not that all Gnostics didn't reject it, some did, but they believed that the traditions that they held, which were passed down word of mouth by and large, the traditions they had explained, they unlocked the Bible. They really explained what was going on. So that you didn't have this priesthood presenting you with imagery and dogmas. Remember, most people then weren't literate, presenting you with these dogmas that they believed obscured the true reality. They believed in a lot of ascetic practices and mystical practices to bring one into direct contact with divinity.
Got it. Got it.
And so again, gnosis, this idea that you then know. It's not like you believe something, you know. So in the early Christian,
So that's what that word comes from. Gnosis and knowledge is the same thing.
Yeah.
Even though there's a G, even there's a G-N in Gnostic.
Yeah.
And so agnostic means I don't know, right? Okay. I get it. Nice. All right. Very well. I'm glad somebody finally explained that to me. Yeah. Did you see the movie? My favorite movie I've seen in the past decade is this $50,000 Irish indie horror film called A Dark Song.
No.
It's the absolute best, and it's about a Aleister Crowley Abramelin ritual, and it's two people in a house, and they just do this ritual, and it is so friggin' good. And you can't tell if it's all BS or if you can't tell if it's the guy and a girl. You can't tell if it's just the guy trying to bang the girl and swindle her the whole time, or if it's real. And it's months and months just them two in the house. Fucking fantastic film. And they talk about Gnosticism and that, and I think that's kind of what you're saying. It's like these really taxing aesthetic rituals that somehow get you to transcend this realm and get in touch with the higher or different realm. That would be Gnostic.
Yeah, and it could be a lot of different things. So it doesn't have to be a whole lot of ritual. It can be sudden insights. It just depends. I mean, there's so many Gnostic. It's like transhumanism. You could say Gnostic, but you could mean a whole lot of different things some of which are totally opposed. With Crowley, he had a Gnostic revival church. It's still that the OTO, the Ordo Templi Orientis, they still do Gnostic masses.
Okay, so what would a Gnostic mass be?
Well, that's the thing is with Crowley, he was writing about it based off of the old heretic hunters of the 2nd and 3rd century. So you had basically the opposition to Gnosticism was almost all we knew about what the Gnostics believed. They were very detailed. They were oftentimes accurate, if not always, but that was what they were going off of. So that's what Crowley in the early 1900s, when he created his Gnostic kind of revival movement that was part of his wider magical ambitions, or I once stayed with a cult, and the cult leader said that in this business there are shaman and showmen, and shamans and showmen, and Crowley was much more a showman than a shaman. I think that's about right.
Well, that's always the case, right? It's like it's true. Same thing in my world. Everybody always gives credit to Edward Bernays for being the father. But Bernays was not the father of any of that crap. He was just the guy who talked about it. He was just the guy who wrote about it. It was already he had 3 things that he did, and all his books talk about the same 3 things over and over again. It's like he was much more of a showman than a shaman, And I think where everybody's like that, right? What's the quote? You got to decide one day whether you're gonna be somebody or do something.
Maybe Aleister Crowley was the black magic, what Klaus Schwab is to transhumanism.
Meaning it's
You
that
know,
Schwab
pop.
really.
Although
Yeah.
Crowley wasn't a wealthy guy. He was more of an indie rocker, I guess. So maybe it's a bad comparison. You know, according to his kind of mythical or apocryphal story, Crowley died in a flop house with nothing but a magic wand, magic ring, and a magic hat. And his last words were, "I am perplexed."
Is that true? Where was the flop house? Where?
I'm going to say
Somewhere.
England, but I really don't know. I can't
Yeah.
remember. This was told, I believe, by Israel Rigardi, one of those guys. But with Crowley, just to finish off that point, Crowley wasn't really working with the primary texts that did exist about Gnosticism. They were buried. They weren't unearthed until 1945 in Cairo or outside of Cairo, Egypt, near the village of Nag Hammadi. And so in
Whoa.
1945, you have these documents, a massive collection, by the way, of original Gnostic texts written in Coptic. And from 1945 onward, as these texts were translated and the ideas disseminated, suddenly you had a much, much clearer vision of what the Gnostics were really about. And, Crowley, it's very clear that what Crowley was doing was very much kind of a pop bastardization of what the Gnostics were really about. And I think it's very interesting. Again, I am not a Gnostic, but I think all this kind of anti-Gnostic rhetoric is kind of is very much an attempt to find ways to demonize your enemies that aren't accurate. By and large, everything's Gnosticism. James Lindsay's whole Marxism is really Gnosticism and all this.
Okay, but what does he mean by it? It's so slippery, man. People say this all the time, and this is why I do this podcast, because I want to know the answer. What does he mean by Marxism is Gnosticism? What does that mean?
If you take the very basic idea of Gnosticism, 3 points. One, human beings are trapped in a material world that sucks. 2, there's a separate realm in which gnosis exists that doesn't suck and that the elite have access to, right? Kind of cognitively.
So the elite do have access to it.
And 3, the resolution is some kind of identification with that above the material, right? So, this all really the same point, but just to break it down as simple as possible, this world sucks. Gnosis is the way out. Identification with that world is a path, right? So, Marxist, it's if you break this down to its most abstract, generic form, basically any social structure which holds the intelligence and knowledge above the rabble would be Gnostic. So that's pretty much every civilizational mode we have. And what Lindsay is pointing out, is that Marxism does kind of see society under capitalism or, fascist reactionary civilizations. They see society as a trap that we are imprisoned in this place, but through proper knowledge, right? Like through the dialectic, one can arrive at the proper knowledge of the inequality of the system and the exploitation of the system. But unlike the Gnostics, by and large, who sought to escape rather than reform, the Marxists clearly, beginning with Marx and Engels, clearly wanted to completely reorder the physical world according to an ideal. So it already breaks down there. And aside from that, there's really, it's the most superficial of connections. Basically, as far as I can tell, what Lindsay and his acolytes are doing is they know that evangelical Christians and Christians of most Orthodox traditions are going to be afraid of Gnosticism. They're going to see Gnosticism as a heresy. Sounds like something bad, like Satanism, but even more exotic. And so if they could just use that as a lever to point at, trannies and stuff like that and say, oh, well, this is actually Gnosticism. I don't really take Lindsay seriously at all. So I don't really, I tried to debate him on this. Timcast offered to host it. He, as he always does, did not accept. But I just don't. I think that he's just he started his career with a prank. And if I want to be like really, really charitable, if it turns out that all this stuff about Gnosticism is Marxism and so on and so forth, it's all the Hegelian dialectic, the woke right, if it turns out that this is just an extended prank beginning with those early papers, then at that point, I'll give him respect. When he comes out and says, ha ha, with middle fingers flying, I'll give him some respect. But until then, he's just gaming basically evangelical dupes, as far as I can tell.
What was his original prank? It was like a fake scientific paper.
Yeah, there were a few of them.
it?
Him and Peter Boghossian and some chick who I've got a friend of mine's friends with both Boghossian and that female. I cannot remember her name. He says they're great people. So he says. I don't know. Whatever. It doesn't really matter. Lindsay is fast fading into irrelevance. I think that's probably his fate. And he
certainly seems to have pissed off a lot of people. I'm really bad at following these dramas, but he certainly is. Everybody seems to really, really dislike the guy now, at least that I hear about. But I don't really understand why. Yeah, I don't really know why everybody dislikes him so much.
He's not arguing in good faith. He's not really trying to get at reality or point out actual wrongs. He's just gaming people. He's gaming conservatives. He's gaming evangelicals, one way or the other. Even if he has somehow convinced himself that he's right, which I don't think he does believe that, it's still a scam. So yeah, I mean, him and his fat companion Michael O'Fallon. If I never hear about him again, it's too soon. This is the last time. Unless I am debating him in public, I have no interest in anything that he has going on.
Anti-fat companions. Yeah. So all right. So this brings us back to Gnosticism as techno-futurism, right? And before the call, you were talking about, let's talk about the difference between, say, a transhumanist like Elon versus maybe a futurist. You were saying Yuval Harari is a futurist. Everybody knows I had Dugan on yesterday, and Dugan talked about Harari, and Harari said Harari is one of these guys that's like an enemy of our scene, right? And I will say I did read Harari's book, and I was pissed off by it. I was very pissed off by it.
Which one? Homo Deus or Sapiens?
One of those homo books. That friggin' homo.
They're all homo.
All the fucking homo books. But I just hate it. I just hate the whole cut of the guy's jib. It just really bothers me. But I think there was just some bullshit in there about, total nonsense about stereotypes not being true, something. Yeah. Just a total misstatement of science, just a complete fucking bullshit. And so I couldn't go on with him. But anyway, before this, you were saying that actually he's sort of misunderstood as a futurist. Sure. The reason Dugan brought him up is he's kind of an apex globalist, and because we were saying who are the globalists, and it's like Harari is one of them, and he said which is a great quote. He said, "If Trump wins, it's the end of everything."
Yeah.
So anyway, you were saying that he's kind of a futurist and slightly misunderstood. So what's your take on Harari?
Yeah, I think he is. It's now we got three characters working here. We got Elon Musk, Yuval Harari, and Alexander Dugan.
Yeah.
The seventh chapter of my book is dedicated to a comparison of Elon Musk and Yuval Harari.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my God, I didn't get there yet. I'm like 100 pages in, but I didn't make it. This is a long book, man.
It's a long book, man.
But it's great. It's great.
By the way, you can blame Steve for that. I tried to. I was kept going. I really wanted to get to that last chapter, and but it's getting longer. And Steve's like, "Man, just do it. Fuck it." And I did, but then when we start promoting it, and he's like, "This is a 500-page book." I'm like, "Steve, stop! No." Nobody's going to want to read that. But, it did better. Anyway, so, yes, Yuval Harari, Elon Musk, and with Dugan in the background. And we'll bring Dugan in at the end because I have a tremendous respect for Dugan, but I do think that his view on transhumanism is he's in many ways like one of the sources for this misconception that transhumanism is just liberalism taken to an extreme, that it's just globalism. So you've got Harari, gay, Israeli, atheist, and as an historian. And he's describing these things. Like Sapiens was not very good. I didn't read much of it. I went to the index, looked for IQ. There was one reference, looked at that. He said basically all populations essentially have the same, average IQ. And I was like, okay, that's BS, and put it back. But Homo Deus was different. He didn't have any qualms talking about human inequality as it relates to technology. And so Homo Deus, the idea is that through technology, we are creating, in the process of creating human beings who have truly godlike power. And, he begins with the kind of secular or atheistic assumption that religion is nothing but an expression of social structure, and that technology will be the medium or the focus of the religions of the future. And I think all of that is correct. And throughout the book and throughout his lectures, if you listen to the entire thing instead of that one little snippet that dude posts online, if you listen to the whole lectures, he's extremely critical of all of this. He's not saying this is a good thing, like over and over and over again. Anybody who says that Harari is like pro-transhumanism, they've never really read him or ever really listened to him, because he's not. Or if he is, he's a very cautious one.
Yeah. No, that's good.
And he's describing a world in which the wealthiest people, the elite, the billionaires, will create AI systems and brain chips and humanoid robots and autonomous vehicles that replace all the truck drivers and the cab drivers. And they will also be working actively on creating a kind of superhuman brain through either eugenic policies, practices, free market eugenics, or genome enhancement. And he's describing this Homo Deus, right? This God man. And he's talking about it in critical terms. He's like, you should really look at the dangers of all this. This could end up really, really bad with a cognitive elite ruling over these dumb, unenhanced masses, the useless eaters, right? The useless class. And he's describing Elon Musk. He's a historian of the future, so to speak, describing exactly Elon Musk and people like Elon Musk. So what's really remarkable to me is the psyop, whatever its origin, that we're going to look at the World Economic Forum and say, these are the evil transhumanists. We're going to look at Yuval Noah Harari and call him the high priest of transhumanism. And he's literally just talking. It's not like he's building humanoid robots in his backyard. He's just talking. Yeah. Elon Musk, on the other hand, is for many of these same people, probably most, is the good guy.
Right.
The guy that Harari is talking about and is being blamed for, Homo Deus, is what Elon Musk is turning out to be. He is the guy creating the AI and the brain chips and the autonomous vehicles and the humanoid robots. He is the one with an IVF inseminated harem that most likely saw gene-selected children out of multiple options, kind of the early phase of designer babies.
Right.
And so it goes to show you, Mark Twain, I think, really did get humanity's number, that people are very prone to tribalism. And if you get people in a super tribal mindset, you can basically sell them on anything. And that they have sold Yuval Harari as the evil transhumanist and Elon Musk is the champion for humanity to a large group of people. And now all the way up to the White House at this point. It's amazing. So, yeah, I think that Harari is very misunderstood. Even if I don't agree, I'm not an atheist. I do believe in free will. I don't believe that religion is just a narrative or just a fiction or just a story. So I disagree with him on all his fundamental principles, but I think that his critique of technology, as far as pop critiques go, is excellent. So, and most people just don't listen to it. They listen to that one little snippet, they freak out, whatever. They buy a Tesla.
What was the one snippet?
Well, there's been a lot of them, but I think two of the most popular were hackable animals. That one really that rustled a lot of jimmies, and surveillance under the skin. And hackable animals comes from one of his two World Economic Forum speeches. They people talk about him like he's Klaus Schwab's, main advisor or something. They just make shit up. But anyway, he's talking about hackable animals. If you have enough data, if you have enough compute, and if you have enough biological information, like an understanding of human biology, especially genetics, then you can hack the human animal. Human beings are hackable animals. And this is a bad thing, potentially. A very bad thing is what he's saying. And then there's the surveillance under the skin. He's talking, is at the early phase of COVID back in 2020. He's at the Athens Democracy Forum. He's talking about how we'll look back on COVID as the moment that surveillance went under the skin. And if you listen to the whole thing, he's clearly talking about the rollout of testing, contact tracing, and the general surveillance state. And he says very clearly, if this is in the hands of the security state, it's going to be very dangerous. It's going to be very bad. It will be like Stalin, who is bad. And yet they snip out this one little bit, right? It goes viral, multiple accounts. And they're like, no, he's actually talking about how there were nanobots in the injection that are connecting your brain to the internet, and they're surveilling your thoughts. Even if you didn't take the jab, you were going to get the nanobot shedding. Anyway, it's again, it goes to show you that we're going into a dark age of too much information and mostly bad information. But I think that if you understand Harari in principle, he is a mouthpiece for elites to kind of capture the downsides of technology. He is the Maryland, if Klaus Schwab is Green Day, you all know Harari as the Marilyn Manson of futurism, right? Kind of pop, kind of commercial, but still incisive, still insightful, and ultimately like coming from a very demonic and evil place, even if it's legitimate warnings. And so with Dugin, if I'll close it out on Dugin, because I respect Dugin a lot. I think that he is not necessarily an ally, given the tensions between the U.S. and the different U.S. and Russia and the different interests there. But his philosophy, standing alone, especially, I'm not a Dugin scholar, but The Fourth Political Theory was my favorite of the books I've read of his.
Yeah,
and it's very, very insightful. But he's, again, pointing to transhumanism as the logical endpoint of liberalism, while at the same time talking about Nick Land and especially talking about Elon Musk in terms of like, these are the good guys, those are the bad guys, and the tech acceleration is good and transhumanism is bad, but they all spring from the same source. They're basically doing what humans do, right? They're taking the available tools and seeking power. So it's not, I think, again, it's kind of a moralistic scapegoating operation to point to the other side and say that in principle, what they're doing is evil. They're doing evil transhumanism. But I don't think that really holds water for anybody who's thinking about it. It's just a scapegoating operation. You're doing the same thing. So if you're going to argue against them, it has to be on some basis besides the principle of how technology is used and which technologies are used.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that that's also, it's a little bit of a transitional thing, right? I mean, I think that the reason that there's this sort of confusion is more because of globalism versus anti-globalism than humanism versus transhumanism. I mean, I think it's like, everybody is happy with Musk right now because Musk helped save the world, save the country. And so, I think that it's more that his transhuman type of things are a little more forgiven, right? But like I had a tweet that had like millions and millions of views about his, babies, that are, as you said, like gene selection IVF babies.
Probably.
And
maybe not, but probably that's what happened.
Well, right. I mean, at least some of them, right? I mean, do we know?
No, the most evidence that I'm aware of is Grimes speaking in terms of that sort of genetic modification, like doing genetic things to babies in positive terms. And of course, Grimes is his like main
Yeah.
baby mama,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
at least two of those kids were IVF. So, and it's so common, right? Like the gene selection of IVF conceived children is really really commonplace now. So it would boggle my mind if it turned out they just went for it with the first shot. I think more
Yeah.
likely they selected among options.
Well, and also it's like this, right? Exactly. So, and I think that was a wake up call for people being like, okay, like this guy is not quite as saintly as he's like, okay, this guy's a little weird, and that's fine. It's like we always owe Musk a huge debt, and we're far away from I think the period where we can just forget about what he did, right?
Sure.
On the other hand, I think those tech guys, their religion, you're right, it's Gnosticism, it's techno Gnosticism. They exist. They view the purpose of existence as advancement. And they're like, hey, we're here on Earth. We got one life, and we're gonna screw around with what we can do, right? Like we're gonna see what we can do, and that's our job. Like we particularly men, our job is to find the frontier and to go on that frontier. And right now, the frontier happens to be technology, right? And so they're gonna just do it, and they're gonna go. We're gonna go to Mars. We're gonna do AI. We're gonna stick stuff in your brain. And I completely sympathize with that. I totally get it, and I think that drive to advance is fantastic. It's one of the things that I love about humanity, and it's one of the things I love about men in particular, that we have this drive. So I get it. On the other hand, I fucking hate I hate transhumanism, and I hate the way that technology destroys nature, right? And I don't mean nature as in the forest. I mean nature as in the taste of a strawberry. Like nature as in the feeling of being with your friends, with your boys, and going and trying to pick up chicks, or the feeling of a mother and her, being with her family, and they got 20 kids around. Technology destroys those things, and it pretends that it doesn't, right? It says, no, we can backfill. Like it says, we can use the AI to paint the flavor of the strawberry on the strawberry. We can have the AI checkout counter, so you don't really need to worry about having a grocery store clerk. We can have a robot take care of your kids, blah blah blah. But it's like that shit's bad. You don't want to lose those things. If you lose that, then life has no purpose. Life has no meaning. But it's very hard to articulate what that thing is, because you say it's natural. But what the fuck does that mean? Natural? Why is it natural? As Goethe says, even the unnatural is natural, right? It's like AI is just as natural as a strawberry. It's not more natural. So how do you, going forward, this is really the project of somebody like you. How do you argue for natural, or whatever that means?
The first thing to do is not think about this as humanity, in my opinion, like the future of humanity, singular, because that's not how it's turning out, and it's not how it's going to turn out. It will be many humanities. We're seeing the beginning, assuming this train keeps on rolling, we're seeing the beginning of not just a bifurcation, but just a total diversification of what it means to be human on Earth. Arguably, we've already seen that in the last 300 years with industrial society. So it's just going to get more extreme. Starting there, you're going to have some, hopefully a lot, that tend towards seeing the biological as the primary source of joy, of meaning on earth, right? The kisses, the hugs, the fist fights, the mountain climb, the physical experience, the strawberry, right? The organic strawberry straight out of Arcata, California, right? The good stuff. That is that. So that's is a part of the natural world, right? Like a spear is part of the natural world. It obeys the laws of physics. A nuclear weapon is part of the natural world. AI is part of the natural world. So the distinction is biological versus non-biological. But there's not going to be a pure biological human that can survive, right? Naked and afraid is not going to cut it. And so it's a matter of selecting which tools are most useful and also which tools don't come with the downsides of dehumanization, and then using them properly. And then some are going to take those risks, but they have to be seen as risks, right? Some are going to want to go to space, and they do, this is going to require a certain cyborgization in order to survive long-term in space. So, but it doesn't necessarily mean they've shifted away from that biological center of gravity. It just means that that is still the center of gravity as those things are adopted. On the other side, you have the hardcore post-humanist. And that would be the most famous example, according to Musk, would be Larry Page at Google. But there are many other examples. Ray Kurzweil is really in that direction, even if he does have some biological sort of leanings. And there's a great podcast with this guy, Dan Fagella, the Worthy Successors series, where you can hear guys like Nick Bostrom, the critics like Eliezer Yudkowsky, Yosho Bosch, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, probably not. And you can hear these guys talk about humans in terms of a bio bootloader, as Musk has put it, that we were just here creating the cultural and technological infrastructure for the birth of a new type of life, synthetic and digital life, and that's the center of gravity. So all our whole purpose here is basically to feed the AI and build the AI. Our whole purpose in this conversation, in the books we write, in the articles we write, in the art we create, is to feed the future AI, because the future AI is not just going to surpass humanity, it will be the most powerful being on Earth and perhaps in the whole cosmos. It will be God, in a sense, right? A little g God or a limited big G God, but God nonetheless. And so you've got, and that's just two, right? There's all these different positions in between. So how do you argue for the natural or the biological as opposed to the technological being the real source of value and the real motivation for getting up in the morning and fighting for your existence? I think that most people who tend towards that don't need a whole lot of convincing, but I do think that we're going to have to come up with some really good strategies, and I wish I could offer you a perfect one. I simply do not have one, especially as these technologies do become more capable of preserving that. And that's not even considering, I don't want to overcomplicate this, but to me, the real center doesn't necessarily lie in the human body or the human brain, but in spiritual forms and entities and powers that are far beyond anything that we see in the physical and are ultimately our source and our destination. Basically, I'm not a Gnostic, but I understand what they're getting at in that the idea that the material is inherently fallen and the spiritual is inherently superior. And to the extent that transhumanism or posthumanism is Gnosticism, it's like an inversion of Gnosticism. They do want to transcend the biological or the physical like the ancient Gnostics, but rather than transcending into a realm of aeons or form, they want to basically create a physical, a material facsimile of that in the digital realm, in the virtual realm, in artificial intelligence, and transcend the biological into that. They're at direct opposite poles, the kind of techno-Gnostic and the ancient Gnostic or original Gnostic. But all this is to say, your question is a great one. How do you argue for the biological against the technological? I really do think that the primary argument, the primary justification is one of aesthetics, deep aesthetics. What is good? What is beautiful? What feels good and beautiful if you are in alignment with truth? That is the argument in my mind, but it's a hard sell. You're not gonna show up in the New York Times saying that the good, the beautiful, and the true are why we should reject artificial superintelligence. But hey.
Why not? I mean, I think you're right, but it's like, yeah, I mean, and that, I mean, I like framing it as biological versus technological, and yeah, I think it's like, right, the beauty. I also think a little bit of the issue with it is that it's like a sensory thing. Like the techno does a very, very good job imitating sight and sound, but the other three, it can't do. You know,
Right.
it's so far it can't do anything, almost anything on touch, on scent, and on taste. You know, it really can't imitate those. I mean, but very roughly. You know, and but I mean, you know, it can make things taste like kind of good, but it's not. It can't really recreate things. Whereas it can recreate visuals almost exactly. So
Yeah,
until they're able to hit those other three senses, it's always going to be far less satisfactory, right? I mean, it's always look at trans people; they can't fit, you know, they're it's not even close. And then it's as you're saying, these plastic surgeries, right? It's like God tells us don't do it, you know, like because it comes at a price. Like, it always comes at a cost, and you see these women's faces over time. They keep cutting into them, and you know, God, I just watched this movie Holland, about Holland, Michigan. It's like a white people bad movie on Prime, and it's got Nicole Kidman in it, and
Oh
it's
no,
like,
they didn't do it. They didn't mutate her, did they?
dude, they did, man. She's gone into uncanny valley, which is really sad because she's such a great actress. But now you can't watch her because you're watching like this fucking beast face. You know, it's like her face is the proportions are all fucking off, and it's horrifying. You know, it's like that, and that's God talking to us, right? I mean, that's God saying, yeah, don't do that. You know, don't cut your face open to look better. You know, like, don't do that. You know, of course, look, am I going to say that, you know, I'm not a fundamentalist in this way. You know, it's like, look, if somebody gets a boob job, is it really that big a deal? Like, no, it's fine. It's not that big of a deal. But, and look, a certain amount of cultivation is natural. But I think we're talking about extremes here, right? We're talking about the extremes, and right, it's like we got to believe that there's some way in which the beauty of things or the taste of things speaks to us about what they should be. But it's God, it's weird though, right? Because like it gets really slippery, and I think this is like kind of what we need to do is figure out how to argue for nature and biology in the face of this. Like, well, you know, why can't it just be simulated? Why can't it just be replaced? All right, I'm supposed to ask you about Larry Ellison. Can you please ask Joe if he knows about Larry Ellison Oracle? I don't know what that's. He's
gotten a lot of attention of late. You know, day 2 of Trump's presidency, Trump brings out Larry Ellison, Sam Altman, and Masayoshi Son of SoftBank and presents the Stargate project. Huge deal. That technologically, we'll see, right? This is in development. It's been in development for about a year. Abilene, Texas will have like a massive data center complex. The promised investment is $500 billion, but again, we'll see. But this is not a government operation other than the government facilitating the creation of infrastructure for these massive data centers. This is literally Trump bringing out 3 men who openly espouse the belief that they are creating first artificial general intelligence and then super intelligence, right? 10,000, a million, a billion times smarter than humans. God in a box. All 3 of them. Day 2 of Trump's presidency. Symbolically, that is huge. Symbolically, that is Trump having already brought Elon Musk on board as a kind of, if Elon Musk is Luciferian and these guys are godlike, you could say, it's probably don't want to get lost in that analogy. But yeah, so with Larry Ellison, I mean, Larry Ellison's company, Oracle, a lot of it is data, right? Like just how to manage databases, but also a lot of it began with CIA involvement, and CIA remains one of their clients. That's true of Microsoft too, of Amazon. So it's not that uncommon. But Ellison also has openly espoused the belief that mass surveillance will ultimately be a good thing, not only to keep police in check, because if a cop is always being monitored, then he's not going to abuse his power, but also citizens. Citizens will behave better if they feel like they're being watched or are actually being watched. So total behavioral modification on the back of this. So this guy, this billionaire, who Larry Ellison, who has these, in my opinion, abhorrent beliefs about what the proper use of these technologies should be, and whether it's a cargo cult or not, still this belief that they are in the process of creating God in a box, a God that can cure your cancer, right? That was one of the things he presented there next to Trump, was the idea that, like, what are we going to, Trump's like, naturally, kind of practically, what are we going to do with this thing? And they're like, oh, we're going to cure cancer. And how are we going to do that? Well, each person has their own individual genetic profile. And once we understand that through mass data gathering and analysis across populations, and once we understand, once we have sequenced their cancer, should they develop it, or even pre-cancers, then we can rapidly create, using artificial intelligence and robotics, rapidly create an antibody, or some sort of antibody that will cause the body to react and eat up the cancer. So basically a vaccine for cancer. That the platform is very similar to the mRNA platform. mRNA, the benefit that they perceive is the mRNA can be quickly programmed. You don't have to have a live virus or denatured virus to do it. You can just simply construct, synthesize a genome in order to do what you're trying to do. So all this to say that Larry Ellison basically would fall into the category of the transhumanists or the posthumanists or the accelerationists, and as does Sam Altman, obviously, and as does Masayoshi-san, the SoftBank guy. And I think that is probably, look, I am all for closing off the border. I'm all for eliminating DEI. These are all great things. At least we can, as Americans, make decisions about what to do with technology ourselves, hopefully, if it's not muddied up by all these other issues. But as far as the technology goes, from Trump to his son-in-law Jared Kushner to his first buddy Elon Musk, and guys like Mark Andreessen and Peter Thiel, who's been with Trump certainly from the beginning of his political career, all of these guys are talking about what Dugan would call evil transhumanism. But now it's good. The way I've put it again and again is that the difference between evil transhumanism and good American technology is about 6 months.
Yeah. It's interesting, this dichotomy and this whole. I mean, I think we're just in sort of a transitional period where people are starting to wrap their minds around this new paradigm of like the new different groups, and that's why I sort of pointed you to the doomer optimism thing, because it's like that seems to me like the new battle lines are going to kind of be drawn between people who are really disgusted with hyper acceleration and all this stuff, and then those who are kind of all in, on those things. And I think it'll be nice in some ways, because it'll be a lot less like right versus left. I think it'll get a little more complex for a while, of like people kind of tangling with which side of this stuff that they're on.
You see that in the arguments coming out of Hollywood, and then now just artists in general. You see that energy, and most of it is kind of Libby, but there are plenty of people on the right who feel the same, and some who are saying the same. but you have, I mean, what is the guy's name? I will mangle it if I try to say it. The Japanese animator, and they made the skin for images. You know what I'm talking about? The cartoons you see everywhere.
Studio Ghibli. I forget.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I forget what his name is, but that's what it's called.
If I try to, I'll end up making it up and sound like a racist, and I would hate to do that. So, but that notion that you can take an artist's work and then basically bastardize it and trivialize it, and nobody can do anything about it. It is a nightmare for artists, right? You basically having all of your hard work scraped and repurposed in ways that you never wanted. But I don't know that, I mean, maybe legally something will happen to forbid that. There are certain copyright laws in effect to keep something like that from happening, but I don't think that you're going to be able to stop it. And so I do think that it has to be approached in a way that is more of a kind of survivalist mentality. Like, how do you survive in a world in which these trends become dominant? And as an artist, like as a writer, as a painter, as any sort of musician, anyone who is a creative has to reckon with the reality that if any of their creations have been digitized at all, then they can be very easily fed into an AI, and something like what they did can be regurgitated endlessly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a horrible reality for anybody who has any sense of self-worth and dignity. But on the far post-human end of this, and more people are openly speaking like the post-humanists, even if they're not. Tyler Cowen, right? Very bright guy. But he's been saying of late, he's repeated this a few times, that he doesn't write for human beings anymore. He writes for the future AI.
Yeah.
He maybe he's joking a little bit, but I don't get the sense that he's joking entirely. And that is, if their vision comes true, that is all you're doing. You're feeding your soul, and collectively you're feeding the souls of everyone in your society into this machine that becomes a repository for your culture. And it becomes like the secularists and like the atheists and sociologists have viewed the gods as, right? The one of the more popular notions in that kind of materialist philosophy is that the gods represent a society, and that's all they are. Basically, they're just an encoded totem to encapsulate the society. Well, if you have an AI, let's imagine this train keeps on going for 4 generations, and you have an AI that right now is gathering information on Catholics. We have a Catholic AI, maybe a Catholic AI that can take confession, maybe a Catholic AI that can, pronounce the rightness or wrongness of any behavior or belief. And in 4 generations, it has absorbed Irish Catholicism, all of Catholicism, whatever, just take your pick. In 4 generations, it more than likely will be able to speak and perhaps present the information in very vivid ways. You're talking about a God. You're talking about a God that has now replaced the invisible God that these icons are supposed to be pointing to, and has now realized it in material form. You can ask the AI what is right and what is wrong. You can ask the AI, who was my family? Where do I come from? What should I do here? Where are we going? The most important questions that, yeah, sure, they've been manipulated, but what we're talking about is the creation of a tangible pantheon of different gods, this kind of sovereign AI, national AI. So, yeah, the consequences will be dramatic if the train keeps going and if progress keeps advancing. What do we do about it? I don't recommend the TED path.
All right. Yes, that's he was the maybe the beginning of the entire dark aeon we're about to enter. All right. I actually have to go, speaking of technology, because I have a meeting right now. But it was interesting to do this a little earlier. Thank you so much for coming on, Joe. This book is like a book you can kind of get lost in, which is rare for our scene, I think, because it's just so full of stuff. And I really think you're way ahead of the curve. Like, as Bannon, of course, knows what he's doing, and this is basically the discussion of this next phase. I think this is going to be one of the root wedges that defines the next era. Is your kind of stance on transhumanism and the biology versus technology. So yeah, Dark Aeon by Joe Allen. Thank you so much for coming on, man.
Isaac, I really appreciate it.
I'll see you
God
later.
bless.